This is the story of how one banker's defiance of the Federal Reserve made him the most hated man in America. Charles E. Mitchell controlled the largest bank in the United States, openly challenged government authority at the worst possible moment, and became the scapegoat for an economic disaster that historians now say he didn't actually cause. Senator Carter Glass claimed Mitchell bore more responsibility for the 1929 crash than any 50 men combined. President Franklin Roosevelt called out unscrupulous money changers in his inaugural address, and everyone knew exactly who he meant. But what actually happened tells a far more complicated story than the one America wanted to believe. The rise of sunshine. Charles Edwin Mitchell entered the world on October 6, 1877, in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where his father worked as a produce dealer clerk before becoming the town's mayor. After graduating from Amherst College in 1899, Mitchell started at the bottom as a clerk at Western Electric Company and climbed to assistant to the president by 1903. New York came calling in 1906 when he joined Trust Company of America, and by 1911 he'd started his own investment house. The turning point arrived in 1916 when National City Company, the securities arm of National City Bank, made him vice president. Back then, National City Bank was just another bank, but Mitchell would transform it into something America had never seen before. Both presidencies came at once in 1921 when Mitchell took control of National City Bank and National City Company simultaneously at age 43. And the nicknames followed quickly. Sunshine Charlie for his relentless optimism, Billion Dollar Charlie after the bank's deposits crossed $1 billion in 1926. Banking before Mitchell meant intimidating marble halls where customers whispered and bankers judged. Mitchell flipped that model completely, believing banks should hunt for customers instead of waiting for them to appear. Securities could be manufactured like so many pounds of coffee, he famously declared, and he became the first banker to call clients prospects. What he created were financial department stores that replaced the frightening places banking had always been. The growth under Mitchell's leadership defied every expectation. National City became the first U.S. bank to reach $1 billion in assets in 1919, then pushed past $2 billion by 1929. June 1929 marked the moment it became the largest bank in the United States, and by 1930, it operated 100 branches across 23 countries. National City Company grew even faster on the securities side, becoming the world's largest security-issuing entity by 1921. 69 branch offices spread across more than 50 cities by 1929, employing approximately 350 salesmen who worked from a list of over 120,000 prospects, all connected through an 11,000-mile private telegraph wire network. The scale of business National City conducted staggers the imagination even today. More than 20% of all American bond offerings during the 1920s went through National City Company, with annual sales in the late 20s hitting $1.5 billion. 5 years of operations generated approximately $6 billion in total sales. And between 1921 and 1929, the company originated or participated in $10.73 billion worth of bonds, including roughly one-third of all foreign bonds sold in the United States during that period. Mitchell's personal wealth grew alongside the bank's expansion. From 1927 to 1929, his earnings totaled $3,556,732, on top of a modest base salary of just $25,000. And by the time of the crash, his personal fortune reached approximately $20 million, roughly $250 million in today's currency. But here's the thing, Mitchell wasn't just serving the wealthy. His sales force specifically tracked middle-class Americans who'd never purchased securities before, watching as 600,000 Americans earning over $5,000 annually in 1922 grew to 1 million by 1929. Every single one of them represented a potential customer. The day Mitchell defied the Federal Reserve. March 1929 brought the decision that would define everything Mitchell became. Years of climbing stock prices had created a market fueled by speculation and borrowed money, with people buying stocks on margin by putting down only a fraction of the purchase price and borrowing the rest. Everyone could see the bubble forming, but nobody wanted to be the one who popped it. The Federal Reserve gathered on March 15, 1929, but released no public statement afterward. 10 days later, on March 25th, a mini crash erupted as investors started selling and margin calls wiped out holdings, while interest rates on margin loans shot up to 20%. March 26 brought another sell-off with 20 to 30-point losses, and trading volume set a record at 8,239,000 shares. What happened on March 27, 1929, shocked the financial world. Mitchell announced that National City Bank would provide $25 million in credit to stabilize the margin loan market, directly contradicting Federal Reserve policy. His exact words left no room for interpretation. "We feel that we have an obligation which is paramount to any Federal Reserve warning or anything else to avert any dangerous crisis in the money market." Paramount to any Federal Reserve warning. Mitchell had just told the Federal Reserve to step aside. Call money rates dropped from 20% to 8% immediately after Mitchell's intervention. The market stabilized and then resumed its upward climb. September 3, 1929, marked the peak when the Dow Jones closed at 381.17, a level that wouldn't be surpassed until November 26, 1952. Senator Carter Glass, who co-authored the Federal Reserve Act, erupted in fury and publicly demanded Mitchell resign from his Federal Reserve post. The irony cuts deep because Mitchell simultaneously served as a director of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, a position he'd held since January 1929, just 2 months before his defiant announcement. Newspapers split on what Mitchell had done. Some praised him as a courageous man who prevented a complete demoralization of the money market, while others condemned his recklessness. That debate continues today. Did Mitchell prevent a smaller, more manageable March crash, or did he delay the inevitable and make everything exponentially worse? The optimist, who couldn't see what was coming? Warning signs filled the autumn of 1929, but Mitchell kept broadcasting optimism. The quotes that followed would haunt him forever. October 1, 1929, before leaving for Europe. There is nothing to worry about in the financial situation in the United States. 2 weeks later, on October 15th, the markets generally are now in a healthy condition. Values have a sound basis in the general prosperity of our country. October 26 brought declining markets and Mitchell's assessment that the decline had gone too far. Black Thursday arrived on October 24, 1929, when the bubble finally burst. Trading volume hit 94,650 shares, and paper losses reached $5 billion as Mitchell rushed to an emergency meeting at J.P. Morgan's offices with J.P. Morgan Jr., Thomas Lamont, and Albert Wiggin of Chase National Bank. Together they organized a buying pool, and Richard Whitney, vice president of the New York Stock Exchange, made a public show of purchasing 25,000 shares of U.S. Steel at $205 per share, above market price, trying to stop the panic. Mitchell's statement that day became legendary for all the wrong reasons. "I still see nothing to worry about." The Dow closed down only 6.38 points, roughly 2%, making the intervention look successful. That success lasted exactly 4 days. Black Monday on October 28, 1929, brought a record one-day decline of 38.33 points, down 12.82%. Black Tuesday followed with panic selling as over 16 million shares traded, setting a record that stood for 39 years. Another 33 points vanished from the Dow, down 12.8%, and paper losses climbed to $14 billion. Senator Carter Glass delivered his verdict that November in the Philadelphia Record. Mitchell, more than any 50 men, is responsible for this stock crash. The hearings that destroyed him. Everything that followed the crash marked only the beginning. Bank failures swept the country as the economy spiraled into depression. People lost their life savings, unemployment exploded, and Americans demanded someone to blame. March 2, 1932, brought Senate Banking and Currency Committee authorization for an investigation that initially went nowhere until January 1933, when Ferdinand Pecora came aboard as chief counsel. Pecora knew how to build a case from his years as a New York prosecutor. Mitchell received his subpoena on January 24, 1933, and began testimony on February 21, 1933, in room 301 of the Senate Office Building. 10 days of testimony followed as Pecora systematically dismantled Mitchell's reputation. Compensation numbers came first, revealing Mitchell had earned $3,556,732 from 1927 to 1929, while regular bank employees suffered through the Depression. The bank had extended $2.4 million in interest-free morale loans to approximately 20 officers to help them hold on to stock after the crash, but only 5% ever got repaid. Meanwhile, 60,000 shares sold to employees at $200 per share in December 1929 left many owing more than the shares were worth by 1933. Securities practices came next. National City had sold 1.3 million shares of Anaconda Copper at approximately $120 per share before the stock collapsed to $5. Cuban sugar loans totaling over $60 million had defaulted by 1921. Yet the bank issued $50 million in stock and used the proceeds to acquire controlling interest in the failing Cuban sugar industry without telling investors anything about the situation. Edgar Brown took the stand to testify about losing his entire $225,000 fortune with National City. When Pecora asked what he'd gotten out of all that money he'd entrusted to the company, Brown gave a one-word answer: not a cent. But Mitchell's personal taxes delivered the killing blow. On December 20, 1929, he sold 8,300 shares of National City Bank stock to his wife, creating a loss of $2,172,350 that offset his taxable income completely. Charles Mitchell paid no income tax in 1929 despite earning over $1.1 million that year. Technically legal, technically just a loophole, but to Americans drowning in the Depression, it proved the entire system was rigged against them. Pecora wrote later in his memoir that Mitchell assumed throughout his testimony the loftiest moral tone, no matter how questionable the transactions were. Time magazine put it more bluntly, explicitly labeling him the popular scapegoat of the crash. The trial in the fall, February 27, 1933, at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, brought Mitchell's resignation as chairman of National City Bank. Arrest and indictment for federal income tax evasion followed the next month, brought by Assistant U.S. Attorney Thomas E. Dewey, who would later become governor of New York and run for president. 3 charges landed: improper deduction of the $2.8 million loss from the stock sale to his wife, failure to report a $667,000 advance from the management fund, and improper deduction of a $759,000 loss from Anaconda Copper stock sales. 6 weeks of trial stretched from May to June 1933, with prominent attorney Max Stower leading Mitchell's defense. The strain showed as Mitchell reportedly lost 24 pounds during the proceedings. Late June 1933 brought the verdict: not guilty on all criminal charges. Mitchell wept when he heard it. The government refused to accept that outcome. December 8, 1933 brought notification from the Commissioner of Internal Revenue of a tax deficiency totaling $728,709.84, plus a 50% fraud penalty, adding another $364,344.92. The case climbed all the way to the Supreme Court in 1938 as Helvering v. Mitchell, where 7 justices ruled against 2 that civil tax fraud penalties could stand even after a criminal acquittal. Mitchell ended up paying approximately $1.1 million in taxes and penalties combined, the laws he inspired. Mitchell's testimony had already changed the country by then, providing the political momentum that drove sweeping financial reform through Congress. Glass-Steagall became law on June 16, 1933, separating commercial banking from investment banking completely. What Mitchell had done by running both National City Bank and National City Company simultaneously became illegal overnight. The Securities Act of 1933 imposed disclosure requirements and penalties for false information. June 6, 1934 brought the Securities Exchange Act, creating the Securities and Exchange Commission. The Banking Act of 1935 added further regulatory reforms on top of everything else. President Franklin Roosevelt's first inaugural address on March 4, 1933, included the money changers reference that everyone understood meant bankers like Charles Mitchell. Practices of the unscrupulous money changers stand indicted in the court of public opinion, rejected by the hearts and minds of men. These laws created the regulatory architecture that governed American finance for generations, all of it emerging directly from Mitchell's testimony and downfall. But did he actually cause the Depression? The case against Mitchell appears airtight at first glance. His March 1929 defiance of the Federal Reserve extended the speculative bubble by 7 months. His aggressive securities sales pushed stocks onto unsophisticated middle-class investors. National City engaged in practices resembling pump-and-dump schemes, and as a Federal Reserve Director during the crisis, he contributed to the Fed's inaction while the economy collapsed around them. Modern scholars reject this simple narrative almost entirely. Thomas Huertas and Joan Silverman published Charles E. Mitchell, Scapegoat of the Crash in the Business History Review in 1986, arguing that Mitchell's activities, quote, while sometimes ill-advised, were motivated by the economic good sense of the day and were not attributable to either rampant immorality or ungoverned greed. His practices were legal and standard across the industry, but his visibility made him the perfect target when America needed someone to blame. Understanding of the Depression fundamentally shifted with Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz's 1963 book, A Monetary History of the United States, which demonstrated that Federal Reserve policy failures caused the disaster. The Fed allowed the money supply to collapse by over one-third between August 1929 and March 1933, turning a stock market crash into a decade-long depression. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke admitted as much at Milton Friedman's 90th birthday celebration in 2002, stating directly, "Regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We did it. We're very sorry." Modern historians identify multiple contributing factors, including Federal Reserve monetary policy errors, international gold standard dynamics, banking structural weaknesses, agricultural overproduction, income inequality, and excessive margin lending, but no single banker possessed enough power to trigger all of that regardless of their decisions. One financial historian captured it perfectly. Charles Mitchell may have become a well-known figure driving the boom and bust of the 1920s, but this is obviously far from a story about one man. The Forgotten Legacy. Mitchell rebuilt despite the public disgrace. Blythe & Company, a San Francisco-based investment bank, made him chairman in 1935, and through aggressive business development, he paid off his debts and restored his fortune. December 14, 1955 brought his death at age 78, with his Wall Street reputation largely restored by then. The Italian Renaissance-style mansion he'd built on Fifth Avenue in 1926 now houses the Consulate General of France in New York. His name has almost completely vanished from public memory today. PBS and the Smithsonian noted this erasure directly. At the dawn of the Great Depression, Charles Mitchell was America's most notorious banker, yet today his name has faded from memory. Law professor Michael Perino wrote in his 2010 book, The Hellhound of Wall Street, Mitchell strode into the hearing room in obvious disdain for the proceedings, but he left utterly disgraced. What really happened? The verified historical record shows Mitchell genuinely transformed American banking by bringing securities to the middle class, defied the Federal Reserve at a critical moment, made wildly optimistic statements days before the crash, admitted to tax avoidance while earning millions, and inspired through his testimony the regulatory framework that governed American finance for generations. What the evidence cannot support is the claim that Mitchell caused or triggered the Great Depression. Senator Glass's 1929 accusation carried political power, but doesn't match what historians now understand about economic history. The Depression's causes ran far deeper than any individual. Federal Reserve monetary policy failures, international gold standard constraints, structural banking weaknesses, and various economic imbalances created problems much bigger than any one banker could control or create. Mitchell's real significance lies elsewhere. The financial culture of the 1920s found its embodiment in him, capturing all its innovations, excesses, and ultimate fragility in one person. His dramatic fall during the Pecora hearings gave Americans a face for their anger and generated the political momentum needed for comprehensive reform. Villain or scapegoat? His story illuminates the collision between unregulated finance and democratic accountability. Americans decided in 1929 that bankers like Charles Mitchell wielded too much power with too little oversight, and the laws emerging from his downfall reshaped American capitalism completely. Senator Carter Glass got one thing wrong. Mitchell didn't crash the market, but Mitchell's testimony fixed what was broken. That's the story of the banker who defied the Federal Reserve, lost everything, and changed America forever. See you on the next one.